Chinese Studies, New Delhi. I extend a warm welcome to all the participants of today's ICS Wednesday seminar titled From Sentiment to Statute, Legislating Patriotism in Contemporary China. This seminar will examine how the Patriotic Education Law, alongside preceding renditions, has weaved a comprehensive framework of patriotism that permeates both everyday life and institutional practices. In this reading, patriotism is reconfigured as inseparable from loyalty to the party and socialism. The law makes the cultivation of patriotic sentiment a matter of legal duty while simultaneously restricting unapproved historical interpretations. With the use of discourse analysis, the overlapping directives that collectively shape an expansive ideological terrain governing identity, security, and cultural pride across Chinese society in the new era will be examined. The speaker for today's seminar is Mr. Nishant Dilip Sharma. He is a doctoral scholar at O.P. Jindal Global University and is currently based at the Harvard Yinching Institute as an Institute of Chinese Studies Harvard Yinching Institute Doctoral Fellow. As part of this fellowship, he has conducted research at Fudan University and pursued Chinese language studies at Central China Normal University, Wuhan. His research centers on memory studies, discourse analysis of cultural and educational policies, and the politicization of public policy in contemporary India and China. The chair for today's seminar is Dr. T.G. Suresh. He is an associate professor at the Center for Political Studies, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is a Fulbright Nehru Visiting Scholar affiliated with the Mario Einaudi Center for International Studies at Cornell University, Ithaca, New York, and a visiting professor at the Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs, Higher School of Economics, Moscow. His academic work focuses on comparative political economy, labor processes and globalization, and urban development in Asian cities. Before I hand over the proceedings to the chair, I would like to ask all the participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. All participants must remain muted during the seminar. Any questions you may have may be posted in the chat box with your name and affiliation. Alternatively, you may also use the raise your hand function during the interactive session. You shall then be called upon to unmute yourself and pose your question. Thank you. I shall now hand over to the chair, Dr. Suresh. Over to you, sir.
First of all, thank you, ICS, for asking me to chair this session. And, secondly, thank you, Anne Varghese, for this introduction. And I really like Nishant, the way he has framed this issue from sentiment to statute. This is the question of nationalism, and patriotism has been a subject of interest for a very long time in China. And but since China has gone through various historical periods from the fall of the Republican China, we would expect by this time, with the China's increasing and densely, China has become a densely globalized economy, some of these foundational ideas might have changed. But I would, as I expect Nishant to elaborate, maybe tell us more about sometime not, because idea of say, if this, I remember Hans Kuhn's notion about patriotism as a homeland becoming an object of love, and affection, and etc. etc. But today, given China's say extensive integration with the global economy, and Chinese people say, their own global mobility worldwide, and that the kind of traffic of ideas which are coming from many other parts of the world into China, and we'll also see great changes in the Chinese people lifestyle and the way they the way they behave in market, how do they appear in their new costumes. The Chinese people entirely look, totally different from the, the 1940s or 1970s, etc., etc. So, even with all these complex things, happening, it seems China, wanted to say, Chinese government wanted to instill this idea of, say, patriotism, kind of, say, to creating new loyal subjects. But we do not know to what extent, that project is. I mean, usually in Chinese studies in India, and many, Indians I have noticed, they, there is this premise of behind everything happens in China, there is a purposive intention. Sometimes we don't look at this process as it can be shaped by many other factors. But I am not going to say more. But I am also equally, keen to listen to Nishant first. This is a very, very, very interesting and compellingly relevant topic. And as I said in the beginning, he has framed it in a very interesting way. So, Nishant, now I request you to, begin your presentation.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Suresh. And I'm very grateful that you decided to lend your precious time to us. And you started off with very thought-provoking opening remarks. And I'm very grateful that we have this opportunity thanks to ICS, Professor Alka Acharya, and the wonderful team. Week after week, the team sets up great, very interesting talks, and it serves as a good bridge between young scholars, also senior scholars who present, and the audience is also quite varied, and it's a great platform for mutual learning. Having been a part of this a few years ago, it feels like homecoming, and I'm really excited to share my developing work, and I would be very grateful for any feedback of my better peers here. All right, I'll share my screen. All right, I hope that the presentation is visible now. So today with this presentation, I aim to fulfill two objectives. One, I wish to impart a little better understanding of the Patriotic Education Law to the audience than we all stand at this juncture. And second, and more importantly, I want to give everyone a window into how the CPC approaches legislating important issues like patriotism, and therefore the title From Sentiment to Statute, Legislating Patriotism in Contemporary China. All right, so before we begin, I'll just start off with a snapshot of Patriotic Education Law. I'll be using PEL on the slides, just a shorthand for brevity. And let's try and understand what it is and why it matters. So this is China's first dedicated national law on patriotic education, passed on 24th October 2023 and effective since 1st January 2024. Now, when I say first dedicated national law, it does not mean that it is the first policy instrument employed by CPC on matters of patriotism. It would be naive to think that, and we all know loving thy nation is not a new concept by any means. So yes, CPC has used other policy instruments in the past to foster, cultivate, and instrumentalize patriotism in China. And we will discuss some of those as we move ahead in this presentation. Now, coming back to the law, there are 40 articles divided in 5 sections, and they are general provisions, which basically lays out broadly the scope of PEL in terms of its content. Then there is another section on duties and tasks, which defines who the custodians of this law would be, the one tasked with its implementation and promulgation. The third section is about implementation measures. It talks about how the mission of patriotism would be operationalized in the Chinese society. And then there are support safeguards, which are like good old carrot and sticks. They provide encouragement in terms of funding and also lists prohibitions, what cannot be said and done to ensure the effective implementation of the law. Next, the guiding line. Now, of course, it is CCP leadership and Xi Jinping thought are explicitly enshrined, and any law in China would be remiss if it did not adhere to the guiding line of CCP leadership and Xi Jinping thought. This comes both under Liang Weihu and Liang Chueli. Also, I mean, as many of you would know, it's a standard practice in policy texts in China that the leadership thought is hailed as the guiding line. CPC colloquially and sarcastically sometimes is also referred to as Sui Xi Dang, which means it's a constantly learning party, and therefore the guiding ideology of the leadership, all the leaders that have come by and the present leader are very important. So in different eras, different leaders have contributed to the development of socialism, I mean, to the existing conditions in China, albeit with a different level of gravitas. And it's a matter of debate these days. She's emulating what Mao did. And so, yeah, there's a difference in gravitas, but each leader did give some make some important contribution to the theory. The purpose and ideology of this law is to insist on the unity of loving party, nation socialism, Aidang, Aigo, Aisha, Hui Chui. While this unity of this trinity in terms of phrasing is new, I mean, it was conceptualized and this phrase was introduced in 2019, the idea itself is not. It was heralded in a different way in 1990s by Jiang Zemin in the post-Tiananmen era. So it's not new, but the phrasing as a TIFA is something that is new. In terms of scope, it is all society. It's not just about education and not limited to the primary beneficiaries of the education system, the students. In this law, everyone from the party worker to people working in private industry, from teachers to parents, from bureaucrats to soldiers of the PLA, everyone has a role to play. And in terms of external reach, it seeks to enhance the patriotic spirit, not only in the mainland, but also to compatriots in Hong Kong and Macau, educate the Chinese people, including Taiwan compatriots, on national reunification, and while resolutely opposing any ideas of Taiwan independence. Separatist acts are prohibited, and it seeks to also promote patriotic traditions amongst overseas Chinese. In terms of the enforcement spine, as I said, the law is drafted into different sections. So there are departments listed of different legs of bureaucracy, and they are expected not just to uphold, but to foster the patriotic spirit. Now, the road to Patriotic Education Law of 2024. I said earlier that there's a wide range of policy instruments that have come before and have catered to the development of patriotic education in China. But if we talk just specifically for the law, if we see it in terms of what triggered it, it started off in 2019 with the implementation outline for patriotic education in the new era. It was kind of the foundational precursor document which established Xi Jinping thought and laid out the entire broad outline of patriotic education law that came about in 2023-24. And this is, again, the starting point where the love for Communist Party, country, and socialism as a unified concept was introduced. Although Xi Jinping talked about it at the time of May 4 celebration. So that was there, but it was codified here in this law first. And then a number of other policy instruments came about. There were 3 textbook management measures. Now, these were administrative measures implemented to ensure a stricter control over education material to ensure alignment with party ideology. And it established oversight mechanisms to see what kind of content can go into textbooks. And it was a way to control and make sure that the right version of history is taught. We also had the guiding outline for curriculum-based ideological political education. So this directive was aimed at all university courses and not just political theory courses to incorporate ideological and political education elements. It transformed every academic subject as a vehicle for promoting Communist Party values. Then there were a number of supporting directives. Now, these were supplementary policies which provided specific implementation guidelines across institutions. So cultural venues, museums, historical sites, and various other platforms were addressed to systematically promote patriotic education. There was also the Family Education Promotion Law. This law made parents legally responsible for providing patriotic and moral education to their children at home. And so it brought in the family element as well. In 2022-23, there was a compulsory education curriculum standards. I mean, they were different for each subject. Curriculum standards were laid out, and there had to be a certain quota of patriotic education in every subject. Linguistics subjects, history, subjects like English, but also science. So each subject had its own curriculum that came out. Then in 23, the law was adapted. And before this, there were basically two drafts. One was released to the public. The second one was not, as happens. I mean, it's a part of the a little opaque policy process that usually the second draft is not released. But there was a report released that talked about what are the changes. So when we look at this roadmap, how it's the 2019's outline triggered this, and then there were a series of policy measures, one has to wonder why 2019. And the answer is this. I mean, Hong Kong protests. So in 2019, there were protests in Hong Kong about an extradition bill. And just after this, the outline for patriotic education was released. But also there was a policy document released on civic morality, which just preceded this outline. So one could say that, okay, you had the Hong Kong 2019 protests, and then you had a crackdown, and the 2019 outline was the beginning of that crackdown, and now we have the crackdown. But the problem is that this is kind of a journalistic take. I have studied journalism before, so it's often enticing to go into these simplistic explanations, but there's often more nuance to that than this. So yeah, we will try to see if it stands and what exactly was the case through understanding the policy process as well. So let's take a theoretical take now. I'll be linking linguistical analysis to social semiotics, and we'll try to frame problematization. So the lens through which I want us to look at this law today is through the lens of politicization of public policies. Scholars like Deborah Stone, Annie Schneider, Carol Backey, all have shown in their works how laws are not just instruments to solve issues. They are also instruments to actively construct problems by naming them, silencing them, or reframing them. So the next question that comes to mind is, okay, if policy is also problematized, which of course ideological policies like patriotic education does, it creates issues that are to be prohibited. And then there are certain issues that are not explicitly named. They are silenced in the policy, and there's a lot of reframing. So then the question arises that how do we identify these problematizations? So one way would be to look at the TIFA, and this is something that scholars these days are doing a lot, looking at the official phrasings and trying to gauge the problematization therein. But there's another way which I think is very useful, and that is what I've adopted. I've looked at linguistic markers to understand how the policy goes about problematizing concepts. So when you have a policy text, it would have certain positive verbs that dominate, like jiaqiang, strengthen, intensify, kaijan, carry out, develop, unfold, or hongyang, like promote, carry forward. So these are positive verbs that are always there that talk about something positive that will come about. But there are often also neutral obligations. Now, these are like modal verbs, like ingdang, ought to, shall do something. So there are often positive verbs which usually dominate because a policy is usually forward-looking. They tell you what is expected in the coming times. But there are also neutral obligatory markers that lay out the implementation mechanism. But then there are also negative or prohibitives, grammar markers like puda, which draw hard lines into what cannot be done. And if we measure these, it gives us a very good idea of how the policy is framed. And sometimes it helps us uncover the silences or the hidden problematizations. I'll be also touching upon, if I have time, on social semiotics. So when it comes to social semiotics, there are different concepts like functional contradiction. Okay, I'll just go back here. Functional contradictions. So if there is a theory or any document or anything that comes out, it can have a contradiction, but it is often resolved through many different ways, like modality, which lays out the words that define what obligations are, incentives are, and how discipline is to be brought about. Multimodality is a way in which policies are largely implementalized today, because it's not just about the text, it's an experience. The policy, especially ideological policies that are targeted at youth, have to have an element of multimodality. You should have digital platforms that give a more experiential learning kind of an atmosphere. And then you have logonomic systems, basically rules of who may do what. So yeah, we'll touch upon it as we move forward. So let's look at the methodology that I adopted. So the process here was that I extracted verbs, modal verbs, prohibitive markers from the text. And I've already told you that every policy has different kinds of action verbs, obligation models, or prohibitives. And this was done not through manual selection, because of course a bias can come in. This was automated through painstaking sessions on Hugging Face, using cursor, playing around with Antcock and Google Colab, and basically a pipeline using NLP models was developed, which extracts these markers. And then I decided, okay, let's now measure it. What is the percentage of these markers in the policy? So first, I did it on the Patriotic Education Law, the final law that was released. And there was a long Excel sheet, which I cannot show here. So this kind of encapsulates what was found. So there were 169 distinct grammatical markers that were uncovered through the linguistics analysis that I performed. And these 169 distinctive markers include positive, neutral, and negative markers. Also, I looked at where these markers were located, how many times, what was the frequency of each of these markers, what article they were present in, and what was the subject of these verbs. So what was being modified, that is also something that I tracked through this process. And if we just look at the results, there were 31% positive, 57% neutral, and 11% markers were prohibitives. So the part that we can use as problematization, those are 11%. And I have used the negative share as a proxy for problematization, because oftentimes the problem with discourse analysis is that the measurement becomes a little difficult, even if the concept is conspicuous. So it's often useful to use proxies, and this proxy was something that helped in the process. Sorry, water break. All right. Also, if you're paying attention, you might wonder, why not frequency tokens, and why did I use unique markers in this analysis? Well, there is a reason. Legislative texts are often full of boilerplate repetitions. Phrases like "in dang shall" appears dozens of times, but that does not mean that the law is 50 times more obligatory than prohibitive. By focusing on types rather than frequency, I measure the range of linguistic tools that the law deploys. What's in its repertoire? It shows us that duties and actions cover a broad conceptual spectrum, while prohibitions are a much narrower slice, but they do contain a lot of normative weight. I mean, think in terms of a European leader giving a speech in Europe on issues of multiculturalism and hailing how the immigrant community contributes to the economy. But at the same time, while he's doing lip service, and a lot of lip service to these concepts, there might come an instance where he also mentions that, oh, illegal immigrants are also a problem. So while he mentioned that problematization once, the normative weight of that sometimes goes on to define that speech, and then the media picks it up. So therefore, I used distinct markers and not frequency markers. So after analyzing the patriotic education, law draft, I then decided to prepare a corpus of previous policy instruments in the Xi Jinping era that might be useful to understand the framing and the positioning within this law a little better. So there are various policy instruments, and this list is not exhaustive, just indicative of the documents that I have chosen in the corpus. So you have FALU, which are the national laws. These are basically issued by NPC standing committees, general office. They provide kind of a statutory basis and lays out the red lines. So they can be enforced and protected through judiciary. So in my corpus, I do have several laws. Then I have outlines. Outlines are often issued by CCP Central Committee, and it's often jointly with the State Council. So because it comes together, it has a lot of weight. And you can look at outlines in terms of documents that set the policy direction. And then the laws, they instrumentalize it. So yeah, there were outlines that were included. One of the outlines you already know, the 2019 outline. I also included opinion documents. Opinion documents are also, they come out from CCP Central Committee and State Council. They are like programmatic guidance. They're politically binding in the system, but they are different than laws. They list out, they lay out the priorities and act as like a bridge between outline to the law. Then there are some measure documents which are issued by different ministries or commissions. They are like normative departmental rules, and they lay out the procedures, the eligibility of implementing something, supervision, penalties. And the next is plan or program, Fangan. These are released by party or ministries. They are time-bound tasks. Usually, they lay out which are the responsible agencies, what are the milestones to be covered, and converts goals into steps. And then you have notices, Tongche. So notices are circulatory decisions. They circulate decisions. They promulgate information, but also plans. So these are the broad 6 kind of policy instruments that I've analyzed in my corpus. And this is the kind of a snapshot into the documents that I have analyzed. So there are in total, I think, 16 documents. The numbering is not in order because of how I went by analysis. I just wanted to stick to a simple way of doing it, not create confusion. So these are arranged chronologically, and it gives us an idea into what are the topic clusters. So each document was mapped to a topic, what that policy instrument catered to, the topic of it, also the audience, who was it directed at, in terms of how it is operationalized. Then I looked at negative, positive, and neutral markers for each one of these documents. So yeah, I won't go into the details of it because it will consume a lot of time. I'll just show you the results first. So if we look at the negative marker proportion by document type, it tells us that laws usually have a lot more negative markers compared to opinions and outlines. Measures come second, outlines and opinion come next, and then notice. Now, I'd like to clarify here that this is not a definitive, it's not a definitive analysis, right? You can take different corpuses on different topics and you might get different results. But at least in the domain of patriotic education, what I uncovered is that the laws have more negative markers than measures, outlines, opinions, and notices that were included in this corpus. They were related to Young Pioneers. So the Young Pioneer, it's an organization for younger children to join the party, 4 to 14 years of age. And therein, there were almost zero negative markers there. Now, I explained before that I tagged it based on what it caters to, the topic as well. So if we look at the marker composition by topic clusters, you would see that the highest negative count comes in policy instruments that cater to identity, security, and symbols. Then comes the governance of education, and least is education or morality guidance. Now, this heat map, it includes the audience as well as the topic. And I did this basically because I've been fascinated with the idea of paternalism, and I've been thinking about different ways to measure it. And I think this serves as a very interesting way to measure that. So if we look at this heat map, whenever there are identity, security related topics, and if it is catered to the general public, the negative markers are the highest, 30.4. When it comes to custodians that are implementing policy measures and that like governance of education, the markers go less. And the least negative markers are observed when the party is talking to the youth on education or morality guidance. So education and morality guidance, it carries lesser prohibitive markers, and it gives us an insight into how to understand how the party looks at implementing policies in different domains. So what do the numbers mean? The first thing that we see is that there is a graded family state hierarchy, which is visible in the instrument choice. The law basically hard codes red lines on symbols and memory. And there are different articles, especially Article 37, and they also make sure that every actor is treated differently in terms of who the policy is catered to. So when you have identity security related policies catered to the general public, there is hard prohibition and punishment, and these things are quite apparent. When it comes to governance of education, custodians means bureaucrats, the people who are responsible to implement these policies. It goes a little down, but it's still high. And when it comes to morality guidance, as I said before, when it is to youth, there is very little negative framing. When it is to custodians, it is 4.8, which is okay, because of course, implementation measures would have more obligatory markers or performative markers and not negative markers, because they are designed to set a plan on how to implement things. And when it comes to general public, it is 17.5, again high. So the party makes a distinction between general public, the documents on education that are catered to general public, and to the youth. So what we see is that children get nurturing, solutionist language, and negativity rises only when guidance addresses. All right, I hope I'm still audible. The guidance addresses society more broadly. So the reading is that the state is sternest, where security symbols are at stake, strict with adult intermediaries who shape youth content, and gentle with children as objects of cultivation. This is a classic paternal ordering. The second observation is that topic outranks audience and audience modulates it. So when I looked at the heat map, what I discovered is that topic is the main determinant of what level of negativity or negative markers or problematizations would be there. Audience modulates, so it is the second determinant, but topic outweighs it. I also looked at what is the time trend, and I uncovered that before 2019, on average, if we look at all different kinds of policies, 26% of negative framing was there, while after 2019, the average has dropped down to 16.5. And the corpus is largely representative in both these time frames. So it gives us some idea into how the negative framing has dropped down after 2019. So this is why when I said that the protests triggered a crackdown and the party wants to indoctrinate youth, it is a simplistic framing. When we analyze the problematizations, we uncover that the party actually cares about how it frames issues to the youth. Now, when you see that laws tend to have higher percentage of problematizations, and at the beginning I showed you of my analysis that the Patriotic Education Law has just 11% negative framing. You might say that, okay, the topic is education related, guidance related, and the understanding about topic, how topic drives negativity tells us that if there's a pedagogical guidance, then the negativity is low. But at the very first slide, I showed that this law is not about just education. It is an all-encompassing law that brings together a lot of other policy instruments that were introduced before. So we cannot classify this law just into guidance or education category. It does talk about security symbols. It does talk about governance of education. So it should have greater than 11% problematization. So why is it that the problematization is lesser here? And to uncover that, I looked at TIFA. So this was my second step to go into the kind of analysis that is coming up these days. I looked at all the policy instruments, the 16 policy instruments in my corpus, and I looked at the terms like Lisha Shuvu Chui, historical nihilism. This is not a term in the Patriotic Education Law at all. It's not mentioned. It is addressed indirectly. So it appears there are a number of TIFAs that appear in other policy instruments, but are silent in the final law. Now, just because they are silent, it doesn't mean that they are not handled. They are handled by different articles of the Patriotic Education Law. I mentioned the articles here, and I apologize that I did not start off by explaining each and every article of the law, because I think in the age of AI, an AI can do a much better job at just telling you what the law is. So I thought an analysis like this would be more helpful. So yeah, you have historical nihilism. That was an important part, not major part, because it was not mentioned multiple times, but it had a lot of normative weight. And it was there in the outline in 2019. And there were articles that, there are articles in this document that handle it. Article 6 basically lays out what will be the domain of, the topical domain of this law. And it caters to the problem of historical nihilism. It also, the law also uses multimodality through other means, such as if there was a law in 2018 that about heroes and martyrs. So that also is a way to counter historical nihilism. and that is included as one of the prohibitives later in Article 37 of this law. National Security Law 2015, it talked about hostile foreign forces, their infiltration. There are again articles in the last section of the law, in the prohibitives, there are articles that cater to this. It does not name an adversary, but it talks about security literacy. And very interestingly, the law talks about how the party needs to cultivate an environment where it looks to the world, but is confident in Chinese identity and the position of China in the world. So yeah, there's that. Separatism and anti-splitism is also handled through Articles 7, 14, and 23. Terrorism and extremism, which was also in national security law, is handled in Article 14 and 37 of this law. It is folded into general security education and prohibitions and avoids an explicit naming. Banning cult organizations, this includes religious organizations. So the policy does not say that religious organizations are bad, but it asks them to observe patriotic education in the way they perform their duties as religious organizations in civic life. Guard against erroneous views and trends, textbook political gatekeeping. I already mentioned that there were 3 textbook management measures, and this basically caters to how the articles in books have to be approved, and stresses on content infusion and curricular linkage. Ideological fronts and network control. So the article also talks about what are the different platforms and how they should conduct themselves. So there are departments listed, like the radio and television department, press and publication, cyberspace administration, how they should go about ensuring that prohibitives are not there in the society, and at a large level, there should be an encouragement of patriotism. Money worship, hedonism, extreme individualism, which was handled in the civic morality construction outline. This is the one that came before the outline on patriotic education. So these issues are not directly framed, but they are also handled in this law indirectly. Student associations, how they should act. Again, these TIFAs, these phrasings are not there, but they are handled in the articles. So coming to observations, what we observe is that the Patriotic Education Law codifies a solutionist turn. So it does not explicitly list out problems, it just talks about solutions. And I was first fascinated by this issue when I was doing some research in China on historical nihilism. And I thought that because the party has framed it as a problem and it has been mentioned in some speeches, I would think that when I talk about it to a Chinese chatbot or AI, it would talk about it, but it did not. So that goes to show how problematizations, although they have to be mentioned in some kind of speeches and documents that cater more to the party, they are still a taboo to be discussed in public. And therefore, when it comes to a law that is public facing, there has to be a solutionist orientation. We also notice that there is a paternal gradient. The party is sternest towards the public on sovereignty and symbols, strict with adult intermediaries, and nurturing to the youth. The legislation handles problematizations through strategic silences. And these silences do not name the exact problems, but then they cater to it through the articles. And lastly, the law is a capstone in layered regime. The law is the main document that addresses a lot that has been talked about in other policy instruments, but it does it in a manner that is all-encompassing without problematizing a lot of issues. So yeah, I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Nishant, for that very substantive textual analysis of the patriotic educational law you have presented. Um, I can imagine, how many times you may have read and reread all these legal instruments and search for the how all these keywords will appear and etc etc. This is very interesting. But I was actually not very prepared for your this quantitative term. You know, you know. Um, the discourse analysis will usually is something totally different that we generally take it. And I mean, and I do not know, especially this is a topic or an issue which has a very kind of political or a social or cultural. This is a Chinese, as those who are very familiar with the Chinese, China will know that, like in all countries, all modern, nations, the law is also a rhetorical side. And usually we are not very surprised with that because this is pretty much what legal instruments, whenever they try to intervene in any matter in world over, will do. So, for example, the same patriotic law in today's time, we can say this is applicable equally to the United States or India. you know so there is that aspect. And then say, my actually something I was say thinking about, to what extent your this quantitative exercise, finding out all this percentage and graph will really help in terms of its consequence. Although you are not say discussing those aspects, because at the same time one would think of say what would be the purpose of a law at this juncture. You refer to that the context, but also uh, we would see that China as a very modern society, uh, a society which has largely freed from all kind of obligations such as to religion, obligations which are inherited from the past and other social institutions, etc., etc. And there is also at the same time there is a view, especially among many of the young Indian China studies scholars, is that the people in China, they do not have certain amount of say autonomy we would otherwise given to say people in other society, which is actually not true. So Chinese people today, they have a tremendous amount of they exercise in their everyday life, that kind of a autonomy, cultural, so etc etc. So the the idea is that there is a very very kind of a stereotypical notions about China, that the state has always a purposive intentions, and that is essentially to coordinate internal say society, institutions, etc etc. But at the same time, we simply we sort of tend to negate, I'm not saying in your paper, generally this idea that people don't have that autonomy. And actually, and say for example school children in now, I think, in my view, one of the serious challenge, the challenge that China faces is that Chinese people, since they are living today in a highly developed modern commodity economy, and the participation in such an economy is a totally different cultural ideological sphere. And we still use the old notions about ideology, because in China today it is very difficult for a ideology as we understand conventionally, to find out how does it perform there, because a society which is deeply, there is a, although there has been always a critique of the market, but in today's China you will see a market is well entrenched, and since people are socialized into that. Hmm? The second set of issues is that people have also mentioned, like a patriotism meaning. In the earlier socialist period, the Chinese government and the party was very careful about which China they want the people to committed to. It was only socialist China, and from which other history, it was not part of that China. I mean, during say Maoist era, yeah, the imperial China was not, that the party and the people wanted to really say support and care for and protect. But this is a new trend. I mean, this would have been a little more, if an incur into that direction. So say China today, we can see that uh, uh, a new imagination of China, a China which is not say broken down into it's a distinct historical period, but a China which is existing from the time of say uh, for a very long time, so, and it's a linear China. So every history of China, it's a cultural past. It's a all other things are say kind of say legitimately restored, which was actually say criticized and challenged in the earlier period. So today we have a China which is, I think I found it very interesting, and a, we do not know to how much the Chinese youth in today times. If you look at the popular culture in China, of course you will see in media lots of say period, costume dramas and period television series and etc. etc. But the popular cultural imagination is more to more futuristic and etc. etc. Anyway, this has been a very interesting topic. Nishant has studied this as a legal text so thoroughly, and he had identified those keywords which is appearing in and also counted, and you have very a quantitative kind of a arrangement. But at the same time, you mentioned passingly about say politicizing say legislation. You know, nowhere in the world we have a legislation which is devoid of any politics. Say even in post-war Europe, all the legislations had that say politics meaning what? Yeah. Say redefining a social contract. In that sense, it is not. So I think some of the problem that I usually find in the many discussion, even today, when I was studying China like 30 years ago, even today, in the use of the term ideology, looking a perception of China as an always a purposive state, and also sort of a position from which many young Chinese scholars today in India speak, that say legal or say how to put it, like a kind of an institutional democracy is. Give them a moral high ground, etc. I think we need to, really say introspect to these kinds of questions. Anyway, also now with this, I would invite questions of the topic, please.
Uh, Before I go to the questions, just to clarify why I used this approach. Uh, so the thing is, China has been studied qualitatively, and there have been very interesting, qualitative, insightful, nuanced analysis that has come out from time to time. But personally, I feel it requires a very high level of experience and expertise, which I don't have as a youngster. I do not have that deep pedagogy in terms of China studies. I just work around China, but I see myself more as in political science and discourse analyst who loves China and wants to understand China. So that's the reason why I chose a mixed methods approach, and why I think this is useful in current times, and this has to be explored methodologically more, is because the black box that is China, it has direct observations or inferences.
Like we see this. I'm saying because so
Yeah.
this whole idea that China is a how to put it is a, as you said, black box. China is like a lot of mysticism associated with the. I mean, it is not like that. China is a totally, those who have visited China, those who have traveled. I was there in the last 1 month I spent recently, and I can easily see it's a totally different society, very confident, very modern, and also Chinese is the most people traveled all over the world. So if China is not a container, within which a party state to control, modulate, mobilize, society. No, no, not at all. Of course there are, say, dissent and protest and response. It happens all over the world. Like you can say, that's what I'm saying. The same topic can be easily applicable to the case of United States or India or some part of Europe. And so it is. But you have actually got a very good familiarity with the same, how to read a text. But my worry was that what is a story? Somewhere, this kinds of a quantitative analysis, again, will go back to the same, looking at China like this, because one thing China has been doing is periodically China will say redefine a social contract. And that's the reason why it was continues to remain a very important, very, very developed and politically stable society. Today, as you know, that democracy is not that popular. I do not know whether, this is. Anyway, with that, we'll just open up and there'll be some question you can respond to that. Yes,
I,
please,
I,
from the audience.
I agree with the assessment. I just wanted to say, in terms of policy process, society is
Yeah.
vibrant and open, and I've really enjoyed my time in China.
Yeah.
So
Questions?
if you want to understand policies, sometimes it's useful to look at them.
Yeah, anybody can
All
simply
right. So there's
raise
a
their hand and then,
yeah.
ask
I
questions.
see a question. Can you please explain what exactly is the new era and how this outline you just mentioned is different from that of 1994? So the 1994 outline, uh, it was released at a time when Tiananmen massacre had passed, but there were learnings from that. Soviet Union had split, so there was this assumption that democracy and Western kind of democracy has won. And there was also the southern tour of Deng Xiaoping. So the context of the policy was bad. And, one might think that, okay, this policy talks a lot about Xi Jinping thought, but at that time, that outline talked a lot about Deng Xiaoping's slogans and his thoughts. So in that sense, the policies are similar. But the kind of all of society mobilization that has come about in this policy is something that is unique. And what exactly is the new era? So, from time to time in China, different leaders have laid out plan for the period that they would be governing. And how do you look at era, or this time frame could be looked at, I think, from two perspectives. One would be you look at the ambitions where China really is in terms of reaching a new stage of socialist development. After a rapid growth, it had entered a phase where development has to be managed and made more efficient while catering to the new challenges of energy security and global supply chains. So that is one way to look at the new era in terms of ambitions, the situation of the era. Secondly, you could also assess the era in terms of the problematization or the central contradiction which every leader has kind of laid out. So I think in Xi Jinping's period, if I'm not wrong, the primary contradiction is to balance the ever-growing needs of society uh, with the imbalances, economic imbalances, I think. So that's the primary contradiction. Before it was backward socialist production and handling that. So you could look at the era in terms of these contradictions, or you could look at it in terms of the ambitions as well.
Yeah. Maybe just to add, this idea of a new era, it has been constant in Chinese Communist Party's lexicography, from the early period, even say 40s, with the idea of a new China, and in and every time you will see, there is a departure, an invitation to a new, something new, say from central planning to reforms, and also the projection of Shenzhen into the as a feature, after Deng Xiaoping's uh, that initiative, and then say, and then it was like a continuous and as a drop, in throughout. and then say now, and at the same time, what is interesting is that much of the formulations in these not only legal text but also Chinese government and CPC say articulations, it leaves open so much of a say room for interpretations and selection, like which historical event or personality or idea to be selected or removed, that kind of a process of selection or remembering and forgetting will continue. And then say sometimes say uh, so that the last say decade of the Mao era, which was dominated by what is called the politics in command, and that idea was subsequently quiet, I mean, it was quieted, so to speak. So but today today more than explicit, ideas and vocabulary, China even within itself, say progress to this demonstration effect of its infrastructure and development and etc., etc. So this new idea may be also something where China is it's no longer the China as a leader of the Red East. That was idea in the 19 Cultural Revolution time. Now the China is like quite a confident, it's a world leader. Um, so each time this will be uh, this will be you know kind of announced. So any other comments or queries from the participants, sorry, audience? Where are the ICS young scholars? Yeah, let me read out that question for you, Nishant, so that others can also, So this next question by Sheetal is that does the Patriotic Education Law promote different forms of patriotism for men and women? For instance, due to China's plummeting fertility rate, is a women's patriotism positioned in caregiving and family roles? Yeah. By the way, let me also say that those who wanted to ask question, please you can ask question directly, not just writing, but yeah, you can respond to this.
Yes, so this is a very, very interesting question by Sheetal. All right, so the thing is that the law does not distinguish between patriotic duties for men and women in this final version, not even in the draft. But I discussed that there are some cursory documents that should be examined. And for this, I would say that if you go to the double reduction policy in China, which kind of it banned after school tutoring and online education. When I was reading about that law, outwardly what the law said is that there has to be more parity and access to education. What had happened is that the people who were affluent, they were easily able to afford after school tutoring, and so access of education was kind of imbalanced between affluent and people who did not have those financial financial means. So that is what the law kind of tried to say. And this is why I think it's very important to look at the silences or the problematizations that the law caters to indirectly. So indirectly, if you look at that law, what it is doing is it is making education cheaper and therefore reducing the cost of raising a child. And in that way, it answers to the problem of plummeting fertility, as you have said. And so this is the reason why I try to look at problematizations and how they tell us what the party actually wants than what it is saying. So the double reduction policy is something that could be looked at.
Okay, next question from Rapai. How the present PEL is taking care of the proliferation of new communication instruments and technologies?
Yeah. That's a very, very interesting and very pertinent question by Professor. So I mentioned that there's a lot of multimodality these days in the implementation of laws. It's not just implemented through the discursive practices of the text itself. It includes social semiotics, and it includes the use of experiential learning. And when I was in China, I visited several museums and several places of historical importance. And you could see that the way, AR, augmented reality, was being used, the level of technology that was being incorporated into the dissemination of knowledge, it made the whole process much more interesting and fun as a youth. So that is something that China is doing. At the same time, this law talks about funding as well, that the local departments should procure funding. They have the right to procure funding to make sure and guarantee. The law literally states that it has to guarantee free access to sites of revolutionary history, or history that was of the struggle of how the Communist Party created the new China. So you have various instruments, not just technology, but making it affordable, making it accessible. So if, first of all, anyone who has been in China knows that old people can access all of these sites for free, and students have a discount. But particularly the red sites, which started off in 2003, I think, and even before that, I think there was talks of red sites, the sites wherein there's a lot of revolutionary history and relics, red relics involved. So to carry forward this red gene, what the party has done is, number one, it has ensured that there is proper funding. There is promotion of red tourism, and also the law talks about how there should be field trips from schools, and children should go on particular days to visit certain sites. So that is another way of how the party is trying to ensure that what it wants people to learn is learned through mandatory measures, through economic incentives, procurements of funds, and through the multimodality of technology.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. If there are no further question, I would just make a few, points, and then, we can. Yeah. Um, mm, I think these are questions of, say, increasing technological dependency in China today, which is a contrast to the central planning era, where human agency and human will was the driving force, or the transformative ability of the people was, that was focus of that period, even especially Mao era. But now that has been, say, reversed entirely, and then say, this is where China should have applied some politics, at least a choice. But I don't understand why China got into this, uh, you know, indiscriminate use of technology in every field of life, which will be making Chinese society, giving Chinese society a new kind of I'm not saying dehumanizing, a new, orientation, which is a disorienting from, the social fabric of commitment which people usually have, society, family, etc., etc., the shared group solidarity and all that. So that is one area where the Chinese government will, the years to come, will, because something they have introduced and initiated and supported will come back, because you have to then search for even here also in patriotism, you need that human agency to, you have to, it is also about to say conditioning people's subjectivity. And but even in today's case, if this is a sort of a orientation given to the people, because it is so much, and I was actually so surprised to why for everything is technology. And I mean, if someone says that technology has no politics or ideology, now it look like yes. I mean, we go even technology leaders are saying, so. But in that way, China's today's trajectory of technological indiscriminate use of technology might be a problem in the years to come. And then, and one thing I think in your paper relevant also to discuss, Xi Jinping's China dream. What was it? Hmm? If it also giving people a new kind of an ideas initiative. If you speak to many Chinese people, they will say what is their China dream. their China dream is to say live and divide their time between San Francisco and Shenzhen, or something like that. So we have Professor Alkacharya, where is, yes, please, Professor Alkacharya.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Suresh. So first, I would really like to congratulate Nishant. It was a very, very interesting take, as Suresh said, a very different kind of discourse analysis. And what seemed to me, of course, to begin with, I would like to say that as one of the recipients of the ICSHYI, you are one of our very, very significant members. And what we at the Institute like to do is showcase the research that the Institute is promoting, supporting. And therefore, it was very good that you agreed to come on board. I mean, and we had to sort of push you a bit. But see, the interesting thing here is that while I would, to a certain extent, agree with the chair when he said that this constant reference to China as a black box really obfuscates the major understanding that China is out there open. We just need to explore it. But on the other hand, I would go along with you in saying it's a black box in the sense that for us in India, China continues to operate in ways that are understood in very, very standard frames. So you will use the frame of totalitarianism or authoritarianism or communist party ruled state, complete control, without seeing the kind of autonomy and scope that Suresh was referring to that is available to the citizens and within which they express their dissent, they uh, conduct their work, pursue their professions, pressure the state, all these kind of things. So in that sense, I think we need to take a middle ground between taking China only as a black box or taking China as something very easily understandable, because we have to develop the tools. And I think one way that you are adopting, the kind of tools you're adopting, gives us some very interesting insights. For instance, I was very struck by the fact that you did not really use the word authoritarian at all in your presentation. But what you came up with was the term paternalism. And this notion of the state as a paternal figure, which will use the stick if it has to cajole, corset, pamper, but at the same time be very clear about who is calling the shots. So this use of paternalism gives a very interesting nuance to the way in which laws are being formulated. And I think this is something I would really like to hear more about in the days to come. Just one minor question, as not even a question really, but something that I'd like to get your views on, is that when we are, so one aspect is the way in which the state is looking at patriotism. Is it akin to, or are you using patriotism in the same sense as nationalism? Are these two things different in the way in which you have read the law? Is this law intended to enhance nationalism, or is this law actually the way to ensure that you have a highly nationalized kind of a frame for the citizen? So I mean, what I found is a bit of an overlap in terms of how you understand these two terms, and patriotism was a kind of a way in which you were seeking to understand the relationship between a particular kind of relationship between the state and the citizen. So I just like you to shed some light on it, and thank you very much. I enjoyed it thoroughly, Nishan.
Thank you, ma'am. And yeah, the fellowship has really helped me to understand China better, use Chinese tools, and a bit of linguistic skills that I gained. So yeah, it's been instrumental in developing myself as a scholar. So yeah. Talking about, I think patriotism and nationalism is also a question that is
Yes.
in the chat. So
Amritesh.
I think in the Chinese sense, the distinction is with the concept of yo you were saying, or superiority. My tones are really bad, but it basically means superiority. If you conceptualize your love for nation in a superior sense, that okay, we are better than others, and believing that one's own superiority merits an unconditional support, then it falls into the terrain of nationalism. And the text kind of warns against it. It says that you have to be out, you have to be facing the world while being confident. So it is catered to patriotism and not to nationalism. One thing where the concept of patriotism differs in the Chinese context with the Western context is that we in Western democratic settings, we say that if you're a patriot, you have the right to criticize the government, because the government is not the state, right? The country and the state is just governing the nation. So that distinction is there in the Western sense of patriotism. In Chinese sense, the patriotism is more like identifying with a value identification with the nation's history. And this is where Xi Jinping has brought about a change. He has shown that there is a continuity, or so to say, a historical determinism or destiny, that there were different phases of Chinese history, and the CCP is an instrumental part in moving China from the backward times to the forward times. So that continuity is a big theme, like cultural confidence, one who has us in, is something that Xi Jinping introduced to the earlier three confidences, right? So he introduced this just so that this continuity in Chinese history is reinforced. And identification with that continuity is patriotism. So when you think this in these terms, the party is an important part of the cultural heritage, which is leading China towards its destiny of China dream. So yeah, that would be my assessment.
Yeah, I think you have also responded to Amrudesh question. Amrudesh had asked about the difference between patriotism and nationalism. Yeah. I think it has been a very fascinating presentation and subsequent discussion we had. Thank you, Alka, for that very insightful comment. And in fact, there is this methodologically, Nishant work will taking us forward, in a direction which China can be studied very differently, without from a premise, like authoritarianism or anything like that. So that will open up enormous possibilities of but especially not many of us, including me, we are not very much trained in any quantitative say analysis. However, but it's a very interesting. And Nishant, wish you all the best. If for your work and in Harvard. So thank you once again, and thank you for all the participants.
Thank you for the lovely time and this opportunity. Yeah.